Hey, this is Pastor Jason, and I want to welcome you to Harvest Online. I'm so thankful for the opportunity to connect with you in this way. I'm praying for you today. I believe that God is going to work powerfully in your life, and I'm so thankful that you are part of our Harvest Online family. Let's worship.
Good morning, Harvest. We're happy that you're able to join us this morning as we worship. And before we do that, I just want to encourage you. This song says, when you walk into the room, everything changes. So I just want you to remember that no matter where you are this morning, that Jesus can walk into that room and change and rearrange everything in your life. So just remember that and join us as we worship this morning.
Just wanna sit here at your feet, caught up Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. I'm sorry when I just sang another song. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. I'm sorry when I forgot that you're enough. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. I'm caught up in your presence. I just wanna sit here at your feet, caught up in this holy moment. Never wanna leave. I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. Caught up in your presence. I just wanna sit here at your feet, caught up in this holy moment. Never wanna leave. I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you do. I just want you.
Well, again, good morning, Harvest, and thank you for joining us online. We're going to take just a brief intermission as we get caught up with the live service with Pastor Jason. So why don't you take a minute, refill your coffee, grab your journal and your Bible, get ready to take some notes, and we'll be back in just a minute.
All right. Good morning, Harvest. How's everyone doing today? Good. We're so glad that you're here. As we find our seats, I want to welcome anybody who's new this morning. If you're here for the first time, we just want to welcome you, and we just want to say we're so glad that you are here, that you came to visit us. If you're new and you'd like to, after service is over, head out through these double doors right here and go to our hospitality table. They've got a card they love you to fill out, and they want to bless you with an awesome gift. So go stop by and say hi and grab your gift before you leave. There are individuals that are joining us online. They're watching us online at Harvest Online. So let's give it up to everyone who's watching us this morning online. We're glad that you're here joining us virtually. I have a few announcements I want to share with you this morning. All the men in the room said, hey. Hey, there's a few of you. That's good. That's awesome. All right. So, coming up on May 22nd at 8 a.m., the men are going to come out from the men's group. They're going to come out and do some cleanup on the property, cleaning up trash and different things on the property. And it's a great opportunity for guys to hang out together and fellowship together and pray over each other and do all kinds of fun stuff, right? Breakfast is going to be provided. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm sure it's going to be amazing because when guys get together and they think about food, it's usually pretty stinking good. So come May 22nd at 8 a.m. Come hang out. If you're not part of the men's group, that doesn't mean you can't come. Come, please come. Come be a part of it, all right? The 22nd. And hang out with our men. Senior adults. All my senior adults in the room said, there we go. Wow, I got a better response out of the senior adults. That's awesome. Mark your calendars for lunch and fun and games with Pastor Jerry and Linda. They'll be having more details that will be coming up soon. We're planning on Saturday, June 5th at 10:30 right here at the church. So Pastor Jerry will get you guys more information on that. But senior adults, come be a part of that. We're giving you opportunities for you guys to come and hang out with each other. We're giving you opportunities for you guys to fellowship together, which is super important, isn't it? So come and be a part of that, all right? That's it. That's all the announcements I have. That was pretty quick, wasn't it? So I get the privilege of talking to you guys about generosity. As many of you know, we're in our All In campaign. That's what we're calling our campaign, is All In, so that we can build this amazing new facility that we're working on doing. And there are a lot of families that have committed to All In. And we're starting to get some stories back of what God is doing in individuals' lives. So before I share this story, I want to encourage you that if you've committed and you've pledged to All In, and God is doing something amazing in your life, in your finances, in your marriage, in your family, and you want to share that, please, please, please share that with us. Share that with Pastor, because when we get to share the awesome things that God's doing in our lives, it's an encouragement to others, right? And so as God's doing stuff in your lives, please share it with us so that we can share it with others. So this week we received a testimony from a family who said that they made an all-in commitment, but the truth is most months we are very tight at the end of the month. That's a lot of people, right? Things are tight sometimes at the end of the month. This month we increased our giving, and when we sat down to reconcile the books, we had more left than we do normally in the month. Isn't that awesome? And that's not how mathematics is supposed to work. So they went and they reconciled their accounts, and they found out that they had more money than they thought they were going to have. That's the blessing of God, right? God is going to bless. When we commit to being all in to what God has for us, God's going to bless us for it. And so this family was blessed. So that's an awesome thing. So that being said, generosity is something that we strive to example here, and we strive to do as a staff and as a team, and we I know as a church we're extremely generous as well. And so continue to be generous in all that you do, not just in your finances. So if you came today prepared to give physically, there are tables outside as you exit when you leave today. Feel free to fill out the information out there and drop off stuff out there. And then also you can give online. If you don't give online, there's ways to give up on the screen here, and you can continue to do that. Harvest, we love you, and we're so glad that you're here. Let's give it up for Pastor Jason as he comes.
Good morning, church. I'm so glad that you're here. Can I just tell you, it is so awesome to see your faces this morning. Oh my goodness. Here's the deal though. You have to smile at me now while I'm preaching. Like before, I just imagined that you were smiling and laughing and enjoying it, but now I'll be able to tell. So just make sure your face knows that this morning, okay? Skylar, just make sure. All right, I'm teasing. She was actually smiling at me. Oh man, Did you notice the coffee as you were coming in? How awesome was that? I had to celebrate today by pulling out a coffee cup that Tom and Kendra gave me. It says, "Be careful, or you will end up in my sermon." My kids know that's true. But we're excited to have some coffee back again. So today, if it seems like there's like an extra anointing on the message, we won't know if it's the anointing or the coffee, right? We won't know. So I believe that God has a word for you today. Does anyone else believe that? That God has a word for you? I want to start, as we often do, and I know we've sang songs, we've prayed several prayers already, we've done a lot in our start today, but I'm going to ask you to say one more prayer with me. And the point of this prayer is it's like a heart reset for us to just open ourselves to what God has for us today. One of the things that the word says about itself is that it's living and active. What that means is that if God had a word for you yesterday, He has a new word for you today. It's living, it's active, it helps you in your current circumstance. And I think I've just discovered in my own life that one of the things that makes that helps me to receive God's word is just when I say, "God, I'm ready. I want to hear your voice today. I want to listen to your word today." It's so amazing how when I do that, how He speaks to us. Has anyone else experienced that in your lives? So I call it a 30-second prayer. We're just going to pause before we get into the word, and I'm going to ask you. It's a personal prayer. I actually can't pray it for you. You have to pray it yourself. But would you just take 30 seconds and open your heart to what God has for you today? How many of you are going to do that with me today? All right, let's pray. Jesus, thank you for being here with us today. We love you so much. God, right now we open our hearts. We're listening. We're paying attention. We're asking, Lord, that you would speak to each and every one of us in a personal way, in an individual way. In Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen. We've been talking about the promises of God, and we're going to continue that today. You know, it takes faith to trust a promise, right? It takes faith to hold on to a promise. If you think about it, if someone makes a promise to you, then you exercise faith to believe that promise. It could be as simple as someone says, "Hey, I'll swing by your house at 6 p.m. to pick you up so we can go, to dinner." You exercise faith. You believe they're going to be there at 6 p.m. And so at 5 p.m., you start getting ready. You take a shower. You get your clothes on. And at 10 till, you're watching out the window for them, or you're waiting for you exercise some faith because they're going to come and pick me up. It's pretty simple. If someone says, "I'm going to come and I'm going to help you move," then you exercise faith. You rent the truck and you buy the boxes and you pack all your stuff up, and you're saying to your spouse, "They are going to show up on Saturday to help me move." Like there's some faith that's exercised. It's pretty simple. And what I've been trying to do lately is not just teach you the promises of God. We spent a lot of weeks looking at specific promises, but I've been trying to go to people in the Bible who held on to the promises so that we can see not just the promises, but how did they do it, right? How did they hold on to the promises? And one of the chapters I've gone to repeatedly is in Hebrews chapter 11. It's known as the Hall of Fame for Faith. And this whole chapter, it just lists person after person who exercised faith. And I'll just connect the dots for you today because it takes faith to hold on to the promises of God. So today I want to look at one of these people, Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 23. It says, "By faith, Moses." So here's the guy we're talking about today. "By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child.
and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he'd grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking to his reward. By faith, are you hearing it over and over? By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood, so the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. Today, if Moses could come on stage with me and we could do a little interview, and I might ask him, Moses, what would you say to Harvest today? Of all the things that you learned in your lifetime, what would you share? And of course, we don't actually know the answer, so you're just going to have to believe that one of the things that I think he would share with you is this, that you got to let your faith be greater than your fears. You know, Moses had more than a few times in his life to be afraid. If you think about his life, all the people in Hebrews chapter 11, most of them get like one verse or one sentence, right? By faith, so-and-so did such and such. By faith, so-and-so. But Moses, all of a sudden, he has 7 verses. I mean, we have a paragraph in Hebrews 11, and it's filled with these by faith moments. I tried to emphasize them as I read it to you so you would notice it, but there are 5 of them, 5 by faiths that Hebrews talks about in Moses' life. And here's what I want you to think about. Every by faith moment is also an opportunity to be afraid. You know, people of great faith are often celebrated, right? At some point in your life, you might have said, you know, I want to be a person of great faith. But I just want you to consider today that every time you have to exercise faith, you also have to overcome fear. They're connected. Moses' life actually began in a season of great fear. Verse 23 said this, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, but they were not afraid, right? We're talking about fear today. They weren't afraid of the king's edict. If you don't know Moses' story, you actually have to go back to the book of Exodus. And the very first chapter of Exodus, this is an encouraging heading. It's really not. The first chapter of Exodus, the heading is this. It says, the Israelites oppressed. That's how Exodus starts. It's the oppression of the Israelite people. A new king has come into power. And he notices that the Israelites are growing in number. And he says in Exodus 1, verse 10, he says, come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, they'll join our enemies, they'll fight against us, and then they'll leave our country. So the king's afraid. So the king comes up with a plan. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, verse 16, when you're helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby's a boy, kill him, but if it's a girl, let her live. If you keep reading the story, you find out that the Hebrew midwives are more afraid of the Lord than they are of the king. And so they disregard the king's edict and they allow the boys to continue to live, right? And I don't know if you're noticing the theme of fear here, but the king is afraid, so he gives an order to the midwives. The midwives are more afraid they have a healthy fear of the Lord, so they ignore the king's edict. And so the king calls them in and questions them. This is an interesting part of the story because they actually lie to the king, and the king comes up with another plan. So here's his second plan. He says, every Hebrew boy that's born, you must throw into the Nile. That's a river, but let every girl live. Isn't this a crazy story, right? Can I just tell you today, because we're talking about fear, fear will make you do crazy things. I mean, fear is irrational. It doesn't make sense. Fear causes us to do things that don't make sense. And by the way, as I was reading this week, it's a familiar story for me. Most of you have probably heard this story before, but as I was reading it, and I just paused to think about the reality of the king saying to an entire community of people, if you have a son, I want you to go down to the river and throw him in, right? Like, imagine we have the Rio Grande River running right here through our town. Imagine if every day as you were commuting to work, you saw people over there just throwing their babies into the river. I mean, how crazy would this be? And as I pondered that, I began to think about our city and our state, and you might know this or you might not, but our state is one of the most aggressive states, not in throwing babies into the river, but in killing the unborn through abortion, and specifically late-term abortion. And it just kind of hit me because I was thinking about this idea. The king, like, he was so afraid, right? You heard what he said. He said, they're growing in number, and if we don't do something about it, they're gonna grow in so much number that if war breaks out, they'll join up with others and they will overtake us. The king was afraid, and I'll just be honest with you, I never thought about our state in this way, but as I just prayed this week and pondered what's happening in the story, I began to think, like, what are we so afraid of in New Mexico? What's the underlying root of fear that we're willing to allow this to transpire? I mean, y'all, we are killing off an entire generation. People are coming from other states to our state to see this happen. And if you've been here very long, you know I'm pretty public about our stance on this, which, by the way, I'm not okay with. And I love saying things like this. I want you to know that I believe that in our lifetime, we will see an end to late-term abortion in the city of Albuquerque and the state of New Mexico. I just saw this fear. There's this intense fear of the king, and so they're killing the babies. But Exodus chapter 2, Moses is born. He's a boy. They should have thrown him into the river, but instead, they decide to hide him. After 3 months, I don't know if you remember, our kids are getting a little bit older now. I have to think back a little further to remember this season. But like when they're first born, like they're immobile, right? And their cries are cute as can be. Do you remember? It only lasts about 2 weeks. But I mean, it's just like, me, and they're like, oh, they're so cute. And then like 2 weeks later, I mean, it's like, this is not cute anymore, right? And a month in, you're like, oh my goodness, right? Don't judge me, all right? You might have lasted 6 weeks, I lasted 4. I get it, okay? So a couple of months into Moses' life, he's growing up. He's getting louder, right? And his parents are like, what are we going to do? We can't keep him hidden any longer. So mom comes up with a plan. She weaves a basket. She coats the basket with pitch to make it waterproof. And of course, I think it's interesting because the king said, you got to put him in the river. So mom says, I'll put him in the river, but I'm going to put him in the river in a waterproof basket. And she stands, she hides back in the reeds and she watches. And it just so happens that the king's daughter finds baby Moses when she goes down to bathe. And all of a sudden, Moses' life is transformed because the king's daughter takes Moses and takes him into the palace. And now he's being raised in the palace. And we don't know much about Moses' upbringing, which is quite an understatement, because here's all we get. Exodus chapter 2, verse 11 simply says this: one day after Moses had grown up. That's all we got, y'all. Like, he's a baby in a basket, and then he grew up, okay? We don't know much else between those. And what happens next is pretty crazy. Next in the story, Moses kills a guy. I don't know if you know this. He murders someone, which, by the way, if you didn't get to listen last week, you can go back and check it out. But this is just a great time for me to remind you of the lesson we learned in Rahab's life last week on Mother's Day, which was simply this: God can use us despite a messed up, shameful past. God can use us despite a difficult present. And God can use us despite an uncertain future. We saw it in Rahab, now we're seeing it in Moses. because Moses is a murderer. After he murders a guy, he flees to another town called Midian, and here he meets his wife, and they have a son. And then in Exodus chapter 3, I'm just kind of walking you through his story here. Exodus chapter 3, God speaks to Moses through a burning bush. Do you remember this part of the story? It's another crazy part. Moses spots a bush that's on fire, but the description is this: it's on fire, but it's not being consumed, right? It's like it's just burning and burning and burning. And it should, imagine lighting a tumbleweed on fire, right? It's so dry, just boom, it goes up, it's gone. Moses is like, there's something going on here. This bush isn't being consumed. So he goes to the bush, right? Some people are wired to run away from the burning bush. Others are wired to run towards it. Moses is like, I'm going to go check this out. He gets to the bush, and all of a sudden, he has this encounter with God. All of a sudden, God begins to speak to him, and he gives him a really big job. He says to Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh, and I want you to tell him to let my people go. So again, this is a scary calling, right? Go to the king and who's used to giving out the orders, and I want you to deliver an order to him on my behalf, right? It's a scary calling. So Moses goes to Pharaoh, and he says, let my people go, right? At least that's what we think happened because of Charlton Heston, right? I mean, I don't know, y'all, if your brain does this or not, but this week I'm like, is that what happened, right? Because you read about Moses at the burning bush, and he's like, God, I don't know, I can't talk, I'm not eloquent, I don't know, what am I going to do? But in the movie, he goes to Pharaoh, he's like, let my people go, right? Or did he say it more like Elsa, I don't know, did he come in and say, let them go, Pharaoh, let my people go? I don't know, you don't know either, don't judge. Or did he go in and sound like this dude from American Idol? Okay, check this out. Let my people go. You will never read Exodus the same again, I promise you. You are welcome for that. I don't know what it sounded like. I don't know exactly how it happened, but here's what I know, is it had to be scary for Moses. He's showing back up in the town where he's wanted for murder, right? He's walking into the king, and he's telling the king a message from God. Here's what I'm trying. I don't know if you've seen this as I'm telling you his story, but there's opportunity after opportunity after opportunity for Moses to be afraid. But somehow Moses found a way to let his faith overcome his fear. Do you relate to Moses at all? Have you ever been afraid? I do know this. We have seen fear at unprecedented levels in the last 16 months. I mean, I thought of it this week. I thought, what words would I use to describe fear in our nation in these last 14, 16 months? And I would say fear's been weaponized. Fear's run rampant, right? Fear's causing people to do things that are irrational, right? Fear's causing us, just Google it, okay? Anxiety is at all-time highs. Worry is at all-time highs. These are all byproducts of fear. Fear, I found something out this week. I was studying fear. And I don't know if you'll believe me or not, but fear is actually learned. Fear is learned. There's some scientific research that says that we're born with only two fears, the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. and that all other fears are actually learned behaviors. Isn't that interesting? Think about a baby and think about those two things they're definitely afraid of, right? Have you seen a baby when they're learning how to sit up and they topple over, and as they do, you see the fear. It's like, right? You can tell. They're like, oh, right? Or something happens, some loud noise, and they begin to cry, right? There's these two innate fears, but I don't know what you're afraid of today, but honestly, I believe that this is true, that all of the other fears, we learn them throughout our lives. I don't know if you remember being afraid as a kid, and I don't know if you'd be willing to admit it in church or not, but how many of you would say, you think back, I'm not saying you are now, okay, but you think back and you go, as a kid, I remember being afraid of the dark. Anyone? I didn't like you're still afraid of the dark, I know, right? How about spiders? Anyone used to or still afraid of spiders? I don't care. How about this? I'll raise my hand on this one. Snakes? Y'all, I hate snakes. Like, the only good snake's a dead snake, okay? I just do not like them, okay? Do not. Storms? Anyone afraid of storms? You remember? Or maybe as a kid, you remember running to your parents' room and the thunder and the lightning, right? I don't know what you were afraid of as a kid, but somewhere along the line, you adopted a fear. And here's what happens is as you grow up, that fear grows up with you. And what happens is that fear begins to take on kind of its own identity, and then we give it new names as adults, names like anxiety and worry and insecurity and inadequacy. And if fear is left unchecked, it can become paralyzing, and ultimately, it will keep you from the life that God dreams for you. Ultimately, fear will stop you in your tracks from pursuing the plan of God. As I read through Moses' life this week, I noticed at least 4 fears that I saw in his life that I could relate to, and maybe you will as well. The first one was a fear of loss. Most of us can relate to this, especially after the last year that we've had. It's just a fear of losing someone or something that is important to you. You might know this, but my family had COVID-19 back in December. I got it, and then because our family loves each other, I passed it to every one of them. I love you, and here you go, right? I'm kind of joking, but. And I remember, I was thinking about it this week, because for months, what I had heard repeatedly on every news channel was, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And I remember the first night after I got the positive test, I laid in bed, everyone else was asleep, and for a moment I thought, am I going to die? Is this it? Is this what takes me out? And I survived, but I will tell you this. After I survived, I called my financial planner, and I said, let's add some life insurance. I'm not joking. Because what it reminded me, I think we were all learning this, it reminded me of my mortality. It reminded me that I could lose my life at any moment. Any of us could lose our lives at any moment. We've actually never been promised another day, another moment. And for me, it was just a wake-up call that it's like, I got to live my life to the full because I don't know if I'm promised tomorrow. So I'm going to eat barbecue and not a salad. It was easy for me. It was just, I'm going to live this life and I'm going to add life insurance, right? I'm going to take care of my family, right? There's this fear of losing, of loss. It plays out in all kinds of ways. This year we saw it in people afraid of losing their health. We see it all the time in people. There's this fear of losing a relationship, or you play it safe at your job because you're afraid that you might lose your job if you take the risk, or you might play it safe with your finances because you're afraid that you might lose it all. Which, by the way, that keeps you from the generous life that God dreams for you. You just need to know that fear of loss. Like what if I lose it all? What if I give and then I can't pay the bills at the end of the month? Here's a big one for me. I'll be a little vulnerable for a moment. Fear of losing control. Fear of losing control. Do I have any other control freaks here? Some of you you're raising other people's hands because you like to control things. I remember several months ago, I have a counselor that I don't talk to nearly enough, but I called him one day and was really struggling with just some of my responses to what's happening in the world. And he said to me, I think you feel like you've lost control. I'm like, yeah, I totally do. And I just kind of went off for a few minutes on all the things that I'd lost control of. And then, man, I was so mad at him. He said to me, I want to challenge your thinking. And I said, okay, because I don't know if you have a counselor in your life, but I think you should. It makes us better. And we pay counselors to challenge our thinking, right? Even though we don't like it in the moment. And he said, wasn't it an illusion of control the whole time? I will never forget it, y'all. I was in the job trailer at the house that we're building right now, and I went off on my counselor. I said, no, it's not an illusion. I've actually lost control. That's what I said. So, now you know why I have a counselor. I was so mad. I'm not joking. It's not an illusion. I actually lost it, right? This was early. I can't go to the grocery store. I can't. I just told him all this stuff. He's just like my wife does. Just get it out of your system, It was weeks later, that I was I hate to admit this, but he's right. So right. I actually never had control. We like to think we have control, but the loss of control, the reality that we've lost control, it's just, fear of losing will make you do crazy things. Here's what I know. If you succumb to this fear of loss, it will drive you crazy, it will make you miserable, and it will make everyone around you miserable. That's what happens. Moses understood this fear. He was the adopted son of Pharaoh. He grew up in the palace, but to accomplish God's plan for his life, he had to leave the palace. He had to leave. He had to lose control. Verse 25 actually points us to this part of his story. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God, rather to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt because, this is so important, y'all, because he was looking ahead to his reward. Moses was able to overcome this fear of losing, of missing out, because he looked ahead and he said, you know what? I think the reward is going to be better than anything that I'm giving up right now. Some of you might be counting the cost for a decision in your life right now. You're trying to math it, right? You're trying to figure out, to get there, I got to do this, and I don't know if I want to do this. And I just want to tell you today that the reward will be worth it. Don't let a fear of loss paralyze you. Here's a second fear I see in Moses, is a fear of failure. Go back to the burning bush, and Moses is talking to God, and he says to God, who am I that I should go to the Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And he and God have a conversation, and then Moses pushes back one more time. He says, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? Here's what's happening. Moses is wrestling with a fear of failure. What if it doesn't turn out the way I'm hoping? What if, this happens? What if? Can you relate to that? This fear of failure? Fear of failure will often keep you from taking the risk that God has put in front of you. Here's a third fear of rejection. Fear of rejection. I remember as a teenager, having to get the nerve up to go ask a girl out. Boys, men, do you remember that fear? I remember I was a cocky little kid. You don't believe that, but I was. And I told Lisa one time, when I met Lisa in college, I shouldn't even tell y'all this story. I met her in college, and we were just friends, but I knew I wanted her to be my girlfriend. And I told her one day, I said, I said, no girl's ever turned me down. Which was true. So a few weeks later, I asked Lisa out officially. She said, no. I was like, are you serious? She starts laughing, and she goes, of course I will. I just wanted to be the first girl to turn you down. To which I maintain I was never turned down, all right? Because that didn't count, right? What fear of rejection? What if I apply for the promotion and they don't choose me, right? What if I go to the women's Bible study and no one talks to me, right? What if I go to the men's group and they don't like me, right? Like, listen, here's the thing about this fear of rejection. We literally put the power in other people's hands. What are they going to think, right? What are they going to do? Let me just set you free today. You would not think as much about what others are thinking about you if you knew how little they actually thought about you. In other words, you think about them thinking about you more than they actually think about you. And we give them this power. So let me just set you free today, because this might be your fear. This will set you free. You are already accepted by God. You don't need to be accepted by some random person, right? You are already accepted by God. Here's the fourth fear I see, fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown. So many times the thing that holds us back from living the life that God designed for us is simply the fear of the unknown. Moses certainly faced this. He didn't know what the outcome was going to be when he stood in front of Pharaoh, right? He didn't know what the outcome was going to be when God sent the plagues. He didn't know what was going to happen when he stood at the Red Sea, right? He didn't know what was going to happen when he called water from a rock. He didn't know what was going to happen every morning when they woke up and the cloud was moving and they had to follow. He didn't know what was going to happen when the manna showed up. Is it not going to show up tomorrow? Is it going to keep showing up? Like, he didn't know what was going to happen. Very, very few times in a faith walk with God do you get to know the outcome from the beginning. Very few times. In fact, that's why it's actually called a walk of faith. It's a walk of faith. It's a step at a time, right? I'm going to obey, and then I'm going to obey, and then I'm going to obey, and then I'm going to obey, and I'm going to obey. And very rarely does God give you the insight to look much further than the next step. He just wants to see, will we take the next step? So you're today and you're like, I get it. I've faced some of these fears. Maybe you're facing one now. How did Moses overcome his fear? All of that was an intro to get you to this point. How do we overcome fear and hold to the promises of God? Number one, recognize that God is already working in you. Recognize. My grandfather pastored a Pentecostal church in rural Oklahoma, little bitty church. I mean, the whole church fit in like one of these sections, like the building. I mean, it was just like little bitty church. I loved visiting. I'd visit in the summers, and I loved it so much. And my grandpa, he would play electric guitar up on the stage, sitting in a pew, you know. And as it would end, he would put the guitar down, and he'd come up and he'd lead, you know, in prayer, and he'd wish everyone happy birthday, and he would take up the offering, and he'd give the announcement. I mean, it was like a one man. He did all of it, and then he would preach the word. And one of the like, it's just in my memory. One of the things I remember as he was preaching, I heard this, 100 times, is every once in a while he'd be preaching something and he would say this. He'd say, church, we need to recognize and we need to realize. And I remember thinking, aren't those the same thing, Papa? Recognize, realize? Like, why are you saying the same thing? And as I got older, I realized he was actually saying the same thing in hopes that he would drive the point home. And this week, I want you to recognize and realize, all right, that God's already working in you. Some of you are facing a specific fear right now. I want you to recognize that God's already at work. He was at work before you got to that place. He's at work now. He's going to stay. Like, he is at work in your life to prepare you for this season. We see it in Moses' life. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months because they were not afraid of the king's edict. Listen, here's the idea. God began working in Moses' life the moment that he brought Moses into this crazy world. Moses should have died with all of the other Israelites, but God was already at work. God gave his mom courage to hide him for 3 months. God gave his mom creativity to weave a basket and make it waterproof. Do you think it was an accident that the king's daughter just happened to be bathing in the same spot at the same time as little baby Moses came floating down the Nile River? Come on. God was at work. God was preparing Moses for this big job, right? I mean, it's kind of fun to think about. Baby Moses, 3-month-old Moses, floating down the river, right? Just floating down the river. And all the while, God's dreaming, saying, baby Moses, you're going to grow up, and I'm going to send you back to the Pharaoh, and you are going to declare, let them go, let them go. I don't know. God was at work in his life way before Moses even realized it. Because God had a plan for Moses, a plan to help restore the people of Israel. And here's what I want you to see. Moses had no idea. And some of you don't either. Do me a favor, just look at your neighbor right now. Just like wag your finger in their face and say, you have no idea. Go ahead, do it. Now look at your other neighbor and go, you really have no idea. So just tell them. Balcony people, listen. You have no idea what God's already doing in your life. You have no idea what God's dreaming. You have no idea the things that God's already put into action. Friends, you have no idea today, but I'm hoping that I can give you an idea. I'm hoping that today you will recognize that God's already at work. Here's the other thing. You recognize that God's at work, and then you got to refuse to be defined by anyone or anything but God. You just refuse. This is such a powerful verse. Verse 24, by faith, Moses, when he had grown up, here's where I got it, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. By the way, that wouldn't be a bad thing to be known by, right? Like, I live in the palace. I'm the son of the king's daughter. I've been adopted, right? But Moses said, no. There's a calling that's greater on my life than where you see me being here in the palace. Listen, so many of our fears are established by things that are said about us in our past. Many of you, if I asked you to close your eyes and think back to words, defining words from your childhood, you would, because they were so powerful, you would instantly be able to recall hurtful words spoken over you by a parent or a pastor or a teacher or a coach or a family member. I don't know if you know this, but I have ADHD. I was busy as a child, okay? And I remember hearing teachers and Royal Ranger commanders, you don't know what that is, Sunday school teachers. They didn't think I could hear them, but I remember hearing them talk to my mom and my dad and say, that boy, Jason, is a handful. He can't focus. He'll never make it through school. He'll never become anything. You better get a handle on that boy. I remember hearing those words. I also remember my second grade teacher, Miss Weeks. It's interesting how words are so powerful. I remember her name. Second grade teacher. I don't remember anything else. I remember her. And here's why, is at the end of second grade, she pulled me aside and she said, Jason, you're a great student. You're smart. You're going to be something one day. And I remember she said, I think from here on, you're going to excel in school. Can I tell you that from third grade through high school, I got straight A's? Because a second grade teacher spoke life into me. And thankfully, I chose to believe my second grade teacher instead of my Royal Ranger commander who kicked me out, right? He probably should have. I had it coming. But here's what I'm saying. Words are powerful. And too often we accept what's been said about us and it becomes a label, right? I'm a divorcee. I'm a failure. I'm a horrible parent. I'm an alcoholic. Just fill in the blank. There's all these labels that we put on ourselves that were spoken over us. They started as just, a little thing that was said over us or about us or to us. But then we begin to oh, maybe I am that. Maybe that is who I am. And we allow that label to become who we are. Listen, don't accept those labels. I love what Moses did. Right? He had this great label, the son of Pharaoh's daughter, but Moses knew the truth and he refused that label. Some of you today need to just refuse the labels that someone else has put on you. So you recognize that God's already at work. You refuse to be defined by anything else but God. Number 3, you remember that you're called by God. Moses had this defining moment at the burning bush. It was so holy that God actually told him, take your shoes off. You're walking on holy ground. And in that moment, in the burning bush, God began to call him to go into, he was putting a plan into motion. Do you see it? I'll never forget the night I was called into the ministry. I was 12, 13 years old. I was at summer camp, which, by the way, is coming up in just a few weeks. Our kids will be going to camp, and then our youth will be going to camp. So excited. I'm telling you, it's life-changing. In fact, how many of you will just commit to begin right now to pray for our students for this camp season to be a life-changing summer, okay? Come on. I remember being at camp. I was 12, 13 years old, and I don't remember what the guy preached. I don't remember the altar call. I don't remember the songs. But I remember responding to the altar call. And our campground, it has a stage kind of like this. It's a bigger room, but has a stage. And on the side, there's a little more room. And I remember coming all the way to this side, like all the way to the wall. I wanted to get alone with God. I remember hundreds of kids crying out. Worship teams like, "Rah!" Just leading worship. Just awesome, right? And I remember I'm like over here, I'm just praying, and all of a sudden God began to deal with my heart, and he began to say, son, I have a call on your life. I'm calling you into ministry right now. All these things began to stir in my heart, and I remember because I was over here just weeping and crying, and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Oh my God, it's amazing. And all of a sudden the speaker, he looked over and he called me out. I'll never forget it. He's up here and he's doing stuff and praying over, and he goes, young man. And I was just praying. I heard what he said, but I didn't know who he was talking about because my name's Jason, not young man. And he kept saying, young man. I'm like, who is he talking to? My gosh. And I looked up and he's pointing at me. He said, come here. And he called me up to the front for the whole camp. And then I come up there. I love this. Again, power of words. He looked at me. He said, God's calling you into ministry right now. And he just began to prophetically speak over my life. And he said, Camp, will you just come around this young man and begin to pray over him? I'm just telling y'all, I will never in my life, I'll never forget. There's days I want to forget it, I promise you. There's days this last year that I wanted to forget. I'm like, can I just move to another state that is less oppressive and be a builder instead of a pastor? Because wood does not talk back to you, right? It's awesome. And I'm just telling y'all, every time I would have that conversation with God, he's like, no, I called you. And I would go back in my mind to 12, 13 years old and remember, oh my God, he has a plan. And some of you know the story, but I came home from that camp. I was like, I was so on fire. I'm telling you, it changed everything. Changed everything. I came home and I wanted to be the president of America. I'm like, Mom, Dad, I can't be the president anymore. God has a bigger job for me. He's called me to pastor a church. I mean, I was so excited. I remember all my friends like freaking out over college and sending, dozens of applications out. I sent one application. I'm like, I'm going to Bible school because I'm called. Like, it just defined every part of my life. Listen, when you remember the calling God has, it defines your next steps. It helps you in those seasons where you're like, why am I doing this? What is happening right now, right? You go back and you remember the calling. Listen, some of you need to create time and space to get into God's presence, to hear and to remember the call of God on your life. Which, by the way, I'm going to give you that chance in just a minute. Here's the last one, number 4. So we recognize, we refuse, we remember. Number 4, we rely on God's presence. Here's what I know about fear. Fear is real. Fear is real. I'm not gonna try to talk you out of being afraid. I've tried that. I've tried why are you afraid of that? That's stupid, right? Listen, just because you're not afraid of something doesn't mean it's not real to someone else, right? You can't talk someone out of being fearful, right? Fear is real. Can I tell you what else is real? The presence of God. The presence of God. And when you get in the presence of God and you begin to encounter His presence and you hear His voice and you lean in to the one who loves you unconditionally, the one who dreams about you, the one who created you, the one who gifted you, the one who called you, all of a sudden you're in His presence and all of a sudden you begin to understand, I can draw strength from His presence to hold on to the promise until I get to the other side. Moses is standing in front of the burning bush and he's arguing with God, as some of us have done. I can't do this. I'm not enough. I'm not qualified. And God spoke to him. Do you remember what He spoke to him? God said to Moses, and He's saying it to you and I today. He said, Moses, you can do this. And I will be with you. Moses didn't succeed because he had the Charlton Heston voice, right? Moses didn't succeed because anything other than he relied on the presence of God. Can I just tell you, God's presence changes everything. I'm telling everything. God's presence changes everything. And today, I just want to give you that moment. Would you stand with me? I've asked our worship team if they would lead us in one song. It'll take 5 minutes, 6 minutes. But as we're doing this, would you just go all in? Would you encounter the presence of God over these next few minutes? We prayed it earlier. We said, God, speak to us, and I hope He already has. But this is a moment. You're not going to hear Him speaking through me or through, some message. I want you to hear the voice of God today. He's gonna bring comfort. He's gonna bring peace. He's gonna bring joy. He's gonna bring purpose. Some of you, He's gonna remind you of your calling. Some of you, He's gonna assign you a calling. Let's just go all in for a few minutes. How many of you are willing to do that with me? And let me just say this. I don't want to try to create anything unnecessarily. But if you're facing a fear today, and you understand that only God's presence can overcome that, I would love for you to just, while we're worshiping, to move out of your seat and come to the front as remember, it's a faith thing. And what you're saying is, God, I'm going to rely on your presence. The fear is real, but your presence is real as well. And I'm going to come back up. I'm going to pray over you. And I'm telling you, I believe some of you today, you're going to be set free. Like you're going to walk out of here, you're going to feel a little lighter in your step because you're not going to feel that oppression of the enemy, that lie of the enemy, the fear. We're going to throw off the fear today. So worship team, help me. Let's worship. Let's go all in. I'll be back in just a moment. We're going to pray and believe for God to set us free.
Never fails me all my days.
I hope that you enjoyed our online service today. Friends, I'm praying for you, and I hope that God is moving powerfully in your home and in your family. This is our closing prayer, whether we're in person or online. So as you're going about your week this week, may the Lord bless you, keep you, cause his face to shine upon you, give you grace now and forever. Harvest, go be the church.